I did ask that you have to hand some round things, because we're going to use some round things to get the moon shape onto our paper. So again, any sort of selection of round things is going to be fine. It'll determine what size you end up working, but I've got some Chinese bowls here, and they're quite useful because they're quite nice and big. You can sort of position them on the paper. I think this one's going to be too big because I won't get a lot of room for any traily bits off. So no, I think we'll go for this one. But I'll tell you what, I think I have the traily bits coming down off the top of the moon, as it was. So I've got some A4 paper, and it's sort of in a landscape profile. And this, I'm going to start off by doing the basic shape in pencil, and that's so that I can get it, work to it, and I don't, because I want it to be quite round, I don't want to make too many mistakes to begin with, and I can always rub it out later. So I'm going to start with your biggest circle size, whatever you've got is your biggest size. Drawing that round. I'm just going to adjust the light so that we can sort of hopefully, maybe that's too bright for now. We can just about see that pale sort of pencil mark on the paper. It will become more obvious as we fill it in with doodle, but you can just see there's just quite a large sort of central circle. But because you could completely fill this with doodle and make it a sort of doodle full moon, but we're going for a doodle crescent moon. So then I'm going to find a smaller bowl, so your next sort of biggest size down, and I'm going to put that into the circle. You want to have the outside edge of this slightly overlapping your big circle by maybe a centimetre or that sort of size, because you don't want the points to meet exactly. You want them to be a gap. So I'm then going to draw around that smaller circle inside, and hopefully when you take it off you should see that we've got a crescent moon shape. This line here we're going to ignore, so we should start to see this kind of crescent shape appearing inside the circle. And of course the moon that we see is caused by the shadow of the Earth falling on the moon. So that's how come the moon apparently goes into this crescent shape and then back round to full moon again. It's not actually changing shape, it's just the shadow being cast on it is changing. Right, so this is our sort of basic moon shape. I'm going to add a few circle areas in because we're going to do some chains that come down and sort of like dangle in a kind of dangly jewellery kind of fashion, but I want them to come down to something here. So I'm going to use a small circle. You can use anything that you've got that's smallish. You can use an ink pot, you can use a coin, that's quite a good one if you want like a sort of 2p piece, that sort of size. I'm just going to put a circular shape in there, and eventually that's going to be joined up to some other doodle items, some sort of doodle jewels kind of round here. And then if we need to, we can come back and add in some other circles as we go. But for now, I'm just going to keep this sort of shape to work into, and I'm going to have the little circle here, and then that's going to give me a way of sort of orientating what I'm doing and what I want to draw. Now, a lot of the mandala patterns would use very sort of geometric sort of sweeps of circles to then fill in and create bands of very sort of controlled pattern. This moon's going to be a bit more kind of free form because we're not going to worry too much about loads and loads of geometry. So I'm going to just draw that in a little bit with freehand, hopefully to make it a little bit firmer to sort of see. And then we're going to do some flower designs in here. We're going to do some connecting sort of spiral work in between, and then we'll be using some different techniques to create some tone. Thinking about the design of the piece, I'm going to have this sort of pendulum area sort of coming in here, and then I want to have a chain kind of coming off to around about here. So I'm going to do a sweep of a line, and I want it to finish so it's right above that circle, because this is going to be a sort of chain of beads or something sort of coming through here. And so there's going to be a piece of jewellery about here, and this little spot here is just above this pendant, and then this line is going to come down straight. I'm not a massive ruler fan, but with this one, because we want to give this feeling that it's something suspended, I'm going to use a straight edge. Don't have to use a ruler, just has to be straight. So a pencil will do, piece of paper will do, just so that I've got that line really straight, because that will help to get that feeling of gravity pulling it down. It's just a tiny moment of kind of reality, or not reality, but something that will sort of link these together. And where my line is going to coming up here, so I've got my sweeping line that's going to be all beaded, I'm going to put something here. I'm going to put another circle. So again, this could be an ink pot size. You want to go bigger than your 2p size. I'm thinking it's definitely an ink pot, definitely like the bottom of a nail varnish pot, that kind of size. I don't necessarily mean that we're going to do a circle here, but whatever we do here is going to be a bit more geometric and a bit more controlled. So I've now got a sort of larger circle here, and it's branching across to hit this point here, coming down, and there's going to be something sort of hanging there. Yes. Yes, that's right. So if I put no, it's a bit faint, isn't it? If I get, I'll just see if I can find something that will just fit the sort of size. If I put the big bowl to get like, can you see how it's sort of coming up to that top line there? It's sort of about the right size. So it's coming from that, the position for jewellery, and it's going to come up to the top of that line there. Is that a bit clearer? If I've drawn it a bit clearer, maybe if I turn the light off completely just for now, it might work off. Yeah, so you can just, yeah, does that better? If I turn the light off, it's sort of got a bit of balance of shade and tone. Right, okay, so the idea is you've got something, a detail here, and it's going to loop across, and it's going to come down here to do a detail here, and then we've got a sort of edge of space here. Right, so I'm going to start putting some curves in. I'm going to swap to pen now because it will make it easier to see. You're totally welcome to continue in pencil until you feel comfortable going into pen, or you can go straight into the pen sort of idea. So these areas here, I'm going to put sort of an abstract pattern that's going to come around here with some flowers and some other sort of decorative sort of items. Don't forget, we've got this very thin end, top and bottom here, so it'd be nice to do things that kind of disappear off into that end section. I think we'll probably end up with the end points of the moon really quite dark, almost black in fact, because they go such fine points. It'll give them some sort of definition. So I'm going to start with a kind of spiral that's going to, quite a big spiral, it's going to come into this sort of area here, and it's going to again act as a way of dividing up the circle and giving us areas to work into. So if it hits the edge, this spiral is going to just stop and it's going to reconnect. So if you do end up going off, it doesn't matter, it's all part of the design. And we're going to bring this spiral up and round inside the shape of the moon, but kind of doing its own thing. So that, again, is going to give us something that we can work on, that we can fill with doodle pattern as we go round. And then I'm going to immediately take another branch off this one and bring that up. And again, I want it to sit inside the moon boundary. So we're starting to sort of define that by the pattern that's going on into it. This area here, I want to get a nice sort of end into this sort of very pointed. I want to keep this pointed bit very sort of dark. So I'm going to do a curved line right close up into the end of the moon, and then I can follow my pencil line and draw in the point of the moon. So that becomes quite a defined, strong point. I'll do the same thing on the top of the moon. So again, but I'm doing a curved line, so imagining that it's curving out towards me to give it a little bit of form, and then bring this point through. So hopefully that's immediately making the points of that moon look a bit more obvious and a bit more, so you can kind of see where we're going with those. By the way, I'm using a 0.3 pen. Any pen you're comfortable with using at this point is fine. We can go smaller. Don't start off at 0.5. We've got nowhere to kind of get into, nowhere to go. Right, so this area here is kind of really calling out to me to do some sort of like sideways presenting flower. So I'm going to do one of my Delft flowers, which are flowers that are taken from Delft pottery, or the sort of traditional hand-painted Dutch pottery. So where I've got this spiral coming up here, I'm going to do a half moon coming round to join like that. So you can see that sort of immediately giving us somewhere that it wants to go. It wants to kind of grow up this sort of way. And then I'm going to do some very simple lines fanning out from the bottom out to the top to give that. So I can do one at the middle first, And then I'm just going to let them fan out so they start off in the same point. And we've been doing this before. We've been seeing how if we start in that same point, we get this build up of shadow and tone by the sort of lines that we get in. So we're seeing, and then once you've got that way, we can then come down and try and do the same. It doesn't matter if it's not the same number of divisions, but hopefully you're getting into a rhythm and you can get a fairly even spread of like lines fanning out. And that again makes that corner look into that flower. It makes it look nice and dark and gives it some sort of substance. So the next row I'm going to do on top of here is a little row of what I always think of as dinosaur bumps, because they look like the back bumps of sort of kids' drawings of dinosaurs. So it's just very simple, small little half moon, slightly elongated, slightly more elongated than a rainbow. So they're sort of like bumps, petals. You know, we can think of all sorts of different names for them. But that's what I sort of think of them as, little sort of half moon dinosaur bumps. Just sort of going into there. And I will probably go back and put a little dot detail into each one, just so that it's doing something in there as well. So that's giving me some little dots coming around there. And then I'm going to do some petal shapes. Now, these ones are going to be, they're sort of sideways petals. So we're sort of doing like a sort of wobbly shape like that. It's a little bit like, it's quite free form. It could be a heart with extra bumps. It could be just sort of a wibbly wobbly line, but it just comes up in a sort of curve, does a few wibbles and disappears down again. And like this, if you get a little, it doesn't matter if they're not even, you can just squeeze a little one in the end, and that's sort of giving us a basic petal shape. Now, what I would normally do now is go on and do like a second, something else happening here as a sort of like final kind of row. I'm going to leave this one here for now, because I'm not decided yet whether this is going to follow the shape of the moon or it's going to slightly overlap it, because we're going to sort of play with different sort of ideas of what that could do. So we've got that bit in. Let's have a look at some of the other bits that are happening up here and kind of see. So I think where we've got this little joining point here, I'm going to do a tiny circle at the top, and that's like a sort of loop that's going to be later going to become part of the sort of chain coming down. And then I'm going to do an echoing one around it so that it's a proper circular sort of little detail like that. So it's just sort of coming in to that. And then I think I want to build up something around that point to make it sort of more obvious, because I want it to be a definite sort of join. So I'm going to do a half moon again, but just over round that point. So it's like, at the moment it looks like sort of a rainbow on top of that little circle, and it's going to come down and touch the edges of the moon and be part of that shape. So it's just helping to define that shape. And then I think we'll put some of our nice long teardrop shapes in that we did a look at last week. So we do one in the middle first, like that. So we've got this sort of teardrop. I'll just whiz in a little bit closer as we're getting in. It's relatively small, if I can do that without the camera being too weird and wobbly. There you are, so a little bit closer. Come over a bit more because it's slightly out of focus there. Hang on, I'm just going to shift and then do that. And there, that's a bit better. So I've got one little sort of teardrop shape, and then I'm going to fit some more coming round off that central, just all kind of radiating out of that central point. Just these nice little shapes coming round. And if you've got little triangles, that's fine. Just lit the little triangles on the ends, because we're going to come back and do something with those later. So again, let's take those all the way round to the other side too. So that gives us a little sort of like it always makes me think of those sort of old-fashioned 1920s sort of sunburst windows, you know, where they have door lights over doors with their sort of struts in, and sort of really popular, very simple motif, but really delightful. And then I'm going to put a row of tiny circles all around that, following that spiral shape. So just sort of coming round. I don't have to be perfect, it just have to be sort of roundish. But we can start building up sort of layers of pattern like this, sort of working, giving ourselves a structure to work on and work around, and adding a row of detail each time we sort of go round, and then that gives us that row round there of the sort of going on top. So this is sort of starting to fill this and giving it sort of quite like jewellery-like kind of feel. And then we've got to think what we're going to do with this corner and how we're going to sort of relate these together. So I think what we'll do is I'm going to do a shape round here again as if there was like one of those wobbly petal shapes, but it's going to disappear off. It's definitely going to follow the outline of the moon. So I'm going to do a shape that comes, and it's sort of wibbly wobbly, can be all sorts of abstract, but the moment it hits that pencil line it's going to stop, and it's going to reappear kind of coming in down like that. So you've got this sort of almost like cloudy shape. And then this end one here, I think of this as like what you call in jewellery making terms, call this a terminal. It's where if you had a torque or a necklace it would sort of stop. So this sort of terminal here, I'm going to give it a band by following that shape that we did originally. I'm going to do a second one next to it, and that starts to make it look like it's sort of got purpose. And then I'm just going to take some lines down from this band into that middle point, and again they're all going to coincide with that end point. And as we pile those lines on, as they go down to the end, that end point starts to get darker looking and more defined, and sort of like has a sort of slight horn-like quality to it. So that just brings it there. For some reason my camera's a bit wobbling tonight. I don't know how I'm managing to wobble it the whole time. So I like that effect. So we're going to do the same thing onto this end under here. As I said before, if you're doing a design that has any kind of symmetrical, or you want to have the sort of sides related, if you do something on one side, do it on the other side, the reflecting side, as soon as you can, so that you don't forget what you've done. So again, same deal with this one. We're going to do a second line just to give that like a little collar almost, and then we're going to do some lines that disappear off into that point. So off they go into darkness, and that's just going to give that point definition. And the good thing about this is if you somehow muff up your lines and don't get them running perfectly, you can just colour it in black and maybe to leave a tiny sliver of white as a highlight. But you can also do that as a way forward. It's a very forgiving idea. Right, so let's come back a bit, and now we can see we've got the sort of ends in place, and they've got quite a nice 3D quality. So we'll be using some shading later on to kind of increase that feel. What I want you to think about overall is, if this was a 3D sort of like piece of enamel work or something, turn that off, sorry. So it had a sort of, oh, that's better, isn't it? That's quite better. So if it had like a sort of raised, a curved surface all the way around, there would kind of be a sort of highlight that would run around the middle of the shape. So when we come to shade it, we're going to use that sort of trick to kind of get a kind of overall highlight feel going on. So when we're doing these end bits, if you want to put a couple more lines at the edge and leave a bit of white space in the middle, that will work quite effectively. We'll look at more of that as we go. So now let's have a think about this sort of dangly bit down here. So we want a chain that's going to come down. So the simplest way of doing a chain is to do a row of little circles, but it's quite nice to vary the size. So every now and again you can throw in a slightly bigger one. So there's a larger one, and then come down in size, do a medium one. And you might want to throw like a sort of elongated shape, like a sort of flying saucer one, kind of coming in to give a sort of different kind of feel. And then if you imagine your bead necklace, you might do another round one and then some smaller round ones. And if you want to get really tiny, you can actually go to just doing little tiny dots going down, and that again looks like quite delicate sort of beadwork coming down. And as we come down, they're going to get bigger again, so I'm going to do circles getting gradually bigger. And then let's put another elongated shape in. You can imagine this was a kind of bead that you'd see from the side that would look like this, and from the top would be quite round like a sort of button, but you're only seeing the side view of it. And then we carry on with some larger ones coming down all the way down to what is going to be our kind of stone down there. So that's given us a little sort of beady chain of detail kind of coming down. Now we've got just a round circle here at the moment. I'm going to slightly alter that shape, but the round is going to give us somewhere to start with that shape. So I'm going to turn it into a long, very pointed bottom teardrop. So again, you might just want to watch me do this bit and then you can see what I'm doing. So I'm putting a dot underneath, and that's going to be where I'm going to pull the shape down to meet. So it's like a way of putting a little guideline in that's not too heavy. And then I'm going to come around the shoulder of that circle to about the sort of 9 o'clock position, and then I can just join that up to that dot like that. So I've got like a curve, a much sort of more elongated shape coming round. And by putting the dot there to give us something to aim at, you can take a moment to check the dots where you want it to be, and then you'll find it much easier to aim at a point rather than just sort of aiming at a blank space. And then we can do the other side. So we're going to come round on this side. It would be coming round to 3 o'clock position, as it were, if it was a clock face, and then just taking that down to that dot. And I find that's a way of getting a more even shape when I'm trying to do an elongated shape like this. And then I'm going to put some, like a bit like these petal shapes up here, but I'm going to do quite a big one, and it's going to come up to about halfway through that circle. So again, if you want to, you can put a dot in as a kind of guide point, and then you can do an elongated tear shape that's going to come down into that point and down into that point. So that's given me one sort of shape. And then I want to do the same thing, sort of the same thing either side, but I don't want them to touch all the way up. I don't want them to be quite as close as this. So I'm going to, again, you might just want to see one side so you see what I'm getting at. So I put my dot in so I know where I'm going to start. I'm going to bring it down and let it touch so I've got a definite triangle at the top, like that. So the same on the other side. I'm just going to bring it over and let it come down so I've got a definite triangle between them. And then that has a slightly more kind of faceted feel. It looks a little bit more like a polished stone rather than just being a sort of flat shape like that. And then I'm going to take a line sort of halfway through that one. I'm going to do a curved line coming up to that upper point again, so it's just a little slice of a curve. I can do the same thing here, but this one again, remember we've done our circles before, this one at the front is going to be really straight because it's sort of face onto it, and then I'm going to take the same one down on this side so we get a sliver that's then curving that way, and that starts to give it almost like because you can see that bit of circle in there, it almost looks like a sort of hot air balloon, or it's got that sort of more bulbous sort of feel to it. And then I think I'm going to put a little circle underneath. So imagining this is a big heavy glass bead and we've got another little bead underneath, and I might just put another little drop but facing the other way up, and that kind of helps to finish it off. We're going to come back and we're going to do some shading on this to give it a really kind of jewellery-like feel. But I think what I'm also going to add into where these ones come down to touch these top bumps here, I'm going to put a soft little triangle in just to, again, give that kind of faceted feel, and a triangle on this side like that. So it's looking like another shape might be cut. And then I'm going to take that point up into that middle section on both sides. And by putting those sort of lines in, it kind of really does make it look like it's a faceted glass bead rather than being just a sort of smooth round shape. So we may come back, we're going to come back to this as to put some more detail in, but we've got our this is our sort of dangling moon gemstone. So now we've got this line coming back across, haven't we, where we've got this trail of beads, so with it coming to this centre point here. And because this is, as it were, going on top of our moon, I want to do the beads here next because they're on top of our moon, so everything else has to fit behind them, sort of perspective wise. So let me just get that so it's closer to that section. We're going to be doing beads in the same kind of way as we were doing these sorry, I should give this a bit of a twist. That's better, give it a tug. I'm going to be doing beads in the same way, but of course we're going to be seeing them at a slightly different angle because these beads are going from front on. Let me just try. That's not too bad. We can just about see that, I think. These beads we're going to be seeing from the side, aren't they? Whereas these ones we're sort of seeing they're hanging down. These ones are going to be hanging vertically because we're seeing them side on. So we just start doing circles. Started with some little tiny ones. Again, following that bead shape, that sort of line, guideline that you've drawn, just sort of coming across from there. And then we can put a big bead on as soon as we've got room to get one on. And if you remember all the sort of doodle circles that we did before, maybe if I just move my paper down a bit, because the camera has unfortunately a very short focal depth. So if I come down to here, where it is, it might get a bit sharper. That's better, I think. So remember how when we're doing our doodle balls, we're just going to do that, but in a tiny little scale. So we can start off by just doing some lines. So again, a straight line kind of up the middle, but then a couple of lines curving out one way and then curving out the other. And that immediately starts to look like a little bead that's maybe got like a ridge surface. And, you know, you can do as much detail as you feel like doing. You can do bigger beads that have a lot more surface to them. We can do a daisy bead if we do a circle like that, and then we can sort of put like a daisy shape on it. So we do a circle again in the middle and then do our drop petals, working our way round one at a time round that central point, and that starts to look like a bead with a sort of embossed daisy on it. Like that. So that's given us a daisy bead as we come along, so it's something a bit different again. And then we could do maybe an oval bead, so it's a bit not a perfect circle but a sort of fatter, chunkier shape like that. And then it's going to have a smaller one coming down to a little tiny one, and then we can do a few little tiny drops along. So we're just getting that sort of progression. And then maybe we might have a long drop here, as if we've got some more sort of jewels hanging off this chain. So here I can do, imagine there's a drop that's got a hole through the top, but we can do a long drop shape sort of coming out of there. And if you want to give that again a sort of sparkly feel, if we put across a diagonal line through the bottom, and then we put another diagonal line through the bottom like that, and then we do a sort of triangle coming up, getting that little crisscross sort of like moment at the bottom, it really starts to look like, again, like it's a sort of faceted jewel rather than just being a straight jewel. You can leave the sides smooth, or you can take the lines up to the top and bring those facets all the way up to the top. And then we just carry on with some more little beads, imagining this is our sort of virtual jewellery making class, isn't it? We're sort of making a bead necklace as we go. And we might put, again, the beads are probably going to change in size again and get a bit bigger again, like that. And we could do quite a large bead at this point. And we can do some shapes that are going to come round here. So we can do some drops. And again, start to put a curve on them, bring them back all into that origin point on one side, and then curve them the other way on this side. That's it, and that kind of gives like a little cap. Sometimes you see caps like that with sort of like a pearl bead sitting in between them. And then we're not going to quite let them meet. We're going to stop them so they don't quite meet in the middle. So we've got a little bit of bead showing around the middle. So we can do some toning onto that, and it just sort of looks like, again, a sort of decorative silver bead. I used to be a jeweller, among many other things. You can probably tell because this is all sorts of beads coming back to haunt me from my past, really. But I do like a bead. There's something very satisfying about them. And then we can come down again. So just keep thinking about the rhythm. So you sort of go up, so you build up to a big one, and then you come down again on the other side. So we're going to do some smaller ones coming down again. We can go back later and add more detail to these if we want to. So we get sort of lots of interest and progression. So before we go into this bit here, let's think about what we're going to put on here, because there may be some dangly bits that we don't want to clash with the bead. So we need to see what's going to happen with our stone here. Right, so this is what I'm envisaging. It's going to be like one of those lovely sort of big round polished stones. The technical term for it is a cabochon, which means it's a sort of smooth stone, not a faceted stone. So the first thing I'm going to do is the circle that I've drawn, I'm going to draw it in as a circle. We're going to make it into like a big, a dramatic stone setting. These were very popular in medieval times because they didn't have the technology to facet stones to the extent that we do now. So these big polished stones were very indicative of sort of early medieval jewellery work, and they're very satisfying to set. And so once I've done that big round there, I'm going to echo it with a second. I want to try and get this line quite close to the original circle. If you've got a circle drawing guide, you can get it really accurate. But I'm just going to freehand this round because they always have this sort of little wall of metal kind of going around them, which is the rub over setting. And so it gives them this nice sort of echo around like that. Doesn't matter if it's not perfect, as long as it's sort of roughly following round in the same sort of shape. Now, similar to when we did the eye before, we wanted to get some highlight onto it. I'm going to draw some white highlights, or I'm going to, as it were, outline some areas that are going to stay white to be highlight, to kind of get this sort of shiny kind of feel. And if you imagine this is a domed shape coming out towards us, when you look at the highlights on them, you usually get a sort of bean-shaped highlight, kind of a bit like that, which looks, which is the sort of big main highlight, and then often you'll get a couple of round, sort of smaller highlights, just as in sort of round areas coming back off that, and that's will give it a kind of shiny feel. Once hopefully if we get time, we'll look a little bit of colour. We'll get some tone and colour into this as well to make it look like a sort of moonstone or something. And then I think we should come round and we'll put a row of circles coming round it. So imagining that these are all little tiny stones, like a sort of cluster setting. So these could be sapphires or, well, it could be anything, couldn't it? I mean, you can let imagination run wild. I mean, the obvious one would be to do it like a moonstone, which are absolutely beautiful, and they have this lovely iridescent quality. So we'll have a go at see if we can capture that in one of these stones at least. But we're just going to fill that round as if it's sort of a jewellery setting. And this is the only bit that's at the moment that's sort of like ignoring the moon outline. And this helps to make it look like it's kind of a piece of jewellery sitting on the surface, rather than a surface pattern. So I'm sorry if my hand is just masking a little bit there, but we're just trying to get the circles roughly the same size, sort of going round the outside. And it's a very classic setting and very traditional jewellery setting, but it does look quite convincing. Now obviously each of these stones should have a little tiny moment of highlight in it to make it look like it's a reflective surface. And but we can put that in, but we'll probably put that in with a finer pen a bit later. So here's our kind of setting here. You can add even more to this. We could even add like some sort of filigree moment. So what we're going to do is I'm just going to very quickly count the number of stones I've put in, because I was going to say every 2 stones. If there's an odd number, that won't work. So let's just quickly count how many I've got. I'll do it in my head, otherwise if you're counting too, you'll get completely lost. So I'm going to very quickly count these. Well, fantastically, I've got 29, which is a really awkward number to evenly divide. If you had a nice even number, I would say you could do like a loop coming off each sort of one. 29, is that a prime number? Have I managed to even give myself a prime number? No, 13 would go into it, and that's about it. So that's not much use, because nothing goes into 13, because it is a prime number. Well, I won't do that then. But, you know, what we can do, I was going to say you could do like a loop that comes round over the pairs of stones, but what we can do, as we've got a fantastically odd number of 29, is do some little thin drops that come out in between each stone, like that. So that's just giving that a little bit more of a 3D, or extending that shape into a more dramatic piece of jewellery. It would be pretty difficult to make a piece of jewellery that actually did this, but, you know, this is fantastic doodle land, so we can have fantastical items of jewellery and not worry about it, because no one's asking me to set this into a pendant, which, as I also teach silversmithing in various places, I always get someone that comes in with these incredibly complicated ideas for stone setting, and which terrified the life out of me, and I have to sort of talk them down because, yeah, it can be very tricky creating settings like this. It's the sort of thing that's very easy to draw on paper, and the reality of trying to get metal to behave and do this is a bit different. There's nothing wrong with ambition. It's just that sometimes you need to temper it. Right, so that's just adding another row of sort of detail on, and you could build on that again. You could easily put another element in between all of those. You could build it up, and you can see how this is how the sort of mandalas kind of work, and they kind of join. They sort of build on row upon row upon row of detail. But I'm going to leave that with that, just that sort of detail there. I do, however, want to think about, although this is a drawing, I do want to have a proper fixing so that my bead chain is coming into an actual area that it's fixing to, just because, you know, bit of reality. So I'm going to do a circle here. There's going to be like a big link, but you can see where my bead line's coming to. So I'm going to stop it just before I get to that bead line, and then I'm going to do the same thing on the other side like that, and that gives me a link, and my bead chain is going to link to that, so I'm going to put a little circle into that, and that's going to be where my bead chain links to. And then I can increase the width of this just by putting a second line inside, and that makes it look more like a solid sort of jump ring, like a piece of jewellery. Then I'm going to take my beads now. I can just fill in the beads into this section here, so I'm starting to get this drape happening across. So I can bring my beads. And I say, whenever you draw a little circle like this, this is just a little tiny world that you can go back to later if you want to and put more detailing in. So we don't have to do all detailing now, but we can certainly go back and do some later. And then so now we've got our pendant area here. We've connected it up to the moon, and we've got a nice drape across to this great big sort of fancy bracelet here. So that's kind of the main jewellery pieces that I'm going to put in. So now we're going to go back and fill in the background of the moon and get some pattern going across it, and then we'll have a look at some tone. So I think because I want to keep the jewellery as if they're being put onto this moon as a kind of decorative item, I'm going to keep all the surface pattern now into my moon outline. So I'm definitely not going to bring this flower off, sticking off the edge, I don't think. So in that case, I'm going to do my second row of petals now on this flower. So similar to the sort of shape that I did up here, that's sort of like a wiggly cloud shape, I'm going to do another wiggly cloud, but it's going to stop the moment it hits that edge of moon like that. So it's definitely contained within the moon shape, and I'm just going to see a little tiny bit of it popping into that side there. So it's sort of giving it that, again, that sort of feel of perspective. Then I've got these sort of curl sides here. We'll put some more detail on that flower before we're done, don't worry. But I think I'm going to do some swirls on this side. So where I've got this shape coming around here, I'm going to do a teardrop shape that fits into, but comes off that sort of curl there. You can see that it's just touching the moon edge here. And then I'm going to start another one that slightly overlaps. I need to get I'm going to move this round again so that you can see, because I don't want my hand to mask too much what I'm doing. So let me move this so I can focus on it here. So I'm going to bring my pen in and start my teardrop as if it's overlapping a little bit. So it comes in and then sort of like tucks in behind that one there. So you can see it's sort of got a sort of nice sort of cushiony kind of feel. And I'm going to do a spirally one coming up under, it's just touching the moon outline and coming back onto that. So it's kind of growing out of that curve that we've got. I'm not going to do them all the way following that because it would make them very sort of big and stretched. So once I've done those three in, just fitting neatly into that edge, I can come away from that a bit and do some of these sort of overlapping spirals. And we're going to come back and put some tone on this so they will look quite sort of three-dimensional when we're done. So I've now got those sort of ones coming up on that side. And then I want some to come down here to kind of meet them. So where this curl is happening again, I can follow the edge of the moon and then drop that round into a big fat sort of teardrop in that same sort of way. And then just kind of like fit them in. So you've got to imagine their little tails are kind of tucked into the curve like that. And they're just sort of like squashing and fitting in. And maybe we can fit another one in there before we think about what to do in that spiral. And then always a good infill is to put a circle into a shape like that, because we can come back and we can fill those triangles in, but that starts to have like a sort of nice kind of bejeweled quality. And this little area here, I'm going to imagine it's a tiny bit of sort of leaf, so maybe put something like a wobbly curly shape that just packs things. I want to give this a really sort of well packed in tight kind of pattern on every kind of surface feel. So then I've got this sort of space in here, so if I do a shape a bit like a round, slightly bobbly, and like a sort of smooth kind of paw shape, and then if I put like a sort of like a spine up the middle of it like that, and then bring some edges up and round, that looks like a sort of curl that's maybe front on, and then maybe a sideways curl tucking in to it like that, and I'd see the top of the curl like this, and then a little, and again, weird space, don't know what to do with it, do a circle, and we can sort of fill that in. And what we will be doing, what I will show you is how to go back and give this kind of like quite a nice three-dimensional kind of quality. I'm going to do some more on this side, so similar kind of idea. I'm going to put some curl shapes coming in, just following that spiral round and starting them here, and they're going to go down and kind of get smaller and smaller and disappear off, and then maybe a circle at the end just to kind of bring that pattern around, and then continue them up so they're kind of echoing the ones that are going round that spiral again, and then a sort of big one there, and again then a sort of wibbly wobbly leaf kind of, so it's all part of it but all connected, but sort of doing its sort of thing. And then we can do some spirals coming this way down, so the feather sort of spiral shapes, they're sort of like big fat commas almost, aren't they, or sort of like really exaggerated speech marks, and maybe even sometimes I think of them as being like fat tadpoles, but a fat tadpole doesn't sound as sort of, you know, designedly, does it, as sort of feather shapes. And I'll just put a threes that bump one in there, so there's sort of, the spiral is there, but it's gradually sort of being constructed upon and built on with these kind of teardrop shapes. And so again, if I can come around, I think I put one more in this side like that, and then I'm going to bring some from this point out, so now they're going to come blooming out from that corner there. And again, they're really actually quite simple shapes, but you can just vary the way that they grow by changing their origin point and where they sort of grow out of. So I've got them all just coming out at this point here, so with this on this side of the line I can bring them growing out the other way, and they start to look like sprouts and kind of flower heads. And all I think doing like that, that is definitely saying to me I want a small flower, sort of like something coming out of here. I think that's got that, you know, it's got that written all over it. And again, where you've got sort of a space, you can echo them by doing a second line around, and that creates a different kind of feel. And we can put just one long teardrop in there, and then maybe some circles just filling in that space. So the spiral that is still there, but it's disappearing slowly, and it's just forming a kind of basis that we can work our design around. It's sort of like a scaffolding, I suppose. And then so let's have a similar flower to that one. We're going to fit that one in here, so again just that simple half moon shape to define where that's going to come from, and then these lines all coming out of that central point to make it look like sort of the side of a lily or some sort of exotic bloom, moving around like that. And the row of tiny bumps, and I can sort of slightly eat into that spiral by making it part of the tiny bumps. And there we go. And then we can put some I'm not going to put such big petals, maybe just like little wibbly petals that kind of work around that spiral, but just little bobbly cloud shapes just coming in to that. And there we go. I'm going to have a very quick tea slurp moment, so I'll just bring my camera back so you can see how the whole shape is starting to develop. And I'm going to do a quick tea slurp, and then we'll tackle this bit into here. it's always very satisfying when the tea is at that perfect drinking temperature. Not too hot and not too cold. It's a good, it's a, you know, it's a precious window, that, of the perfect tea moment. Right, so let's bring this a little bit over. There we go. So it's working quite well to keep it more into focus. Okay, so we've now got this sort of end coming in here. This sort of starts to look like it might be a sort of fancy antennae for a sort of this coming out of this flower. So I might kind of keep that feel. I'm not sure yet, but we're going to have something coming out this way. So let's use these teardrop shapes that we've been using here, but we can do sort of elongated ones. So I can just follow that line of the moon there and then bring that round into a sort of, again, a sort of long fat shape, and hopefully I'm going to get 4 of these maybe fitting along here, maybe a few more, but we're just going to let the ends disappear into that band as if it's sort of like holding them. Yeah, I think we'll just get 1 more, and the outer edge of this one is following the moon shape, so that started to sort of really define the end of this moon here. And then we can put some, let me think, I think we'll put like a cloudy shape round into here, and then we can use some of our fine lines just to give some definition or some difference of tone to this area here. And I just want to make sure that I'm having slightly more at the edges and slightly fewer or lesser, whichever one says, I can never quite remember. So the middle is slightly more open and the edges have got slightly more packed lines in. So I'll just put a few more in the edges because that makes the edges look a little bit darker. Like that. So that's some sort of nice strange shape happening here. So with this one, I'm going to then do pairs of like heart-shaped bumps coming out of this, where it's coming up, they've got that spiral coming out. And again, they've got to disappear when they hit the moon edge and sort of reappear round the other side, and the pairs are going to continue round, and I can make them get smaller and I can make them get bigger if I want to. So it's sort of like doing a heart, but as if it's kind of cut round the middle. And this is quite nice because I think it's sort of echoing the bead chain that we had in the top. And as they come round again, they can just hit that bottom circle and disappear like that. And then this side's going to continue round. And as it comes up this side, you can tell this side's got to come back on, got to reappear. And that again is just making this look like it's a pattern on like a piece of ceramic or a carved jewel, sort of coming around. And then I think I'm going to get them smaller and smaller, and we're going to go into some circles, just simple circles spaced out along the line. Do you remember how we did them for the jellyfish doodle, where we had sort of dots along a line? We're going to make them different sizes, but I think I don't know why, it has a quite effective kind of feel, a bit like strings of fairy lights or something still, even in the black on white. And I was just thinking, if you start enjoying these ones and want to do the other one, this would be another one to experiment doing a white pen on black paper. I think it would look really dramatic because you could sort of have the black paper as being like the night sky. Right, so that's sort of this section here. So let's pop upstairs. Not really upstairs, is it? But the top of the design. Right, said that upstairs. There we go. So I really like the way this sort of spiral is developing. So I think I want to have another one kind of echoing up in here. So we want to take this spiral, but I've got to imagine this jewellery is on top of my spiral. So it's probably easier to do a big curve first, bringing it behind the jewellery. So that if you meet a piece of jewellery, that always is like a give way sign. It always has priority. And then I'm going to imagine that then this is now going to continue into a curly spiral, but obviously where it comes across the moon edge, we can't draw it in. So we just lift the pen up, sort of imagine us drawing it, put the pen back down to where we're going to come round, and then give ourselves a spiral up here. So that's sort of like, it's still following the edge shape. And with this one here, underneath this jewellery piece, I'd probably do a spiral, and again lift my pen up, and where I can put it down again, put it down, and just sort of draw in. You're just going to see part of that spiral disappearing underneath, and that then helps to give it that feeling this has been put on something afterwards. So now I've got a sort of spiral in here, and I'm going to put some of my fat comma shapes up in here. I'm going to do some, I think, let me see, this one's got one goes through, isn't it? So there'd be another spiral kind of maybe echoing down from that point there, sort of somewhere up there, and then I can put in some of my comma shapes. So let's put some growing out of this point here, so we can sort of fit some pushing up and round from this corner, and they're going to disappear up into the spiral a bit, and as it gets smaller they can become circles, something like that. And then we've got this flowery bit here, so we can extend that a bit more into a second or third row round of petal. I suppose it is petal, isn't it? And then we've got areas in here we can get more bumps into, and in this one here, oh yeah, that's going to come in round, sort of nice curly ones. And some of them you can put a sort of spiral into as well, and some of them you can keep just smooth kind of comma shapes depending on how the mood takes you. And then I could do a little flower in this section here, so that's a half moon again, and bumps going round and bringing up my lines from the centre point, so that starts to look like a little flower. And again I can then copy it, sort of mimic this side in, and if they overlap that doesn't matter, they can all sort of squash in together. So we're getting these nice sort of swirly patterns happening here. It's quite nice to see the way the spiral works here, by taking that your design sort of getting smaller and smaller to kind of match that spiral. I think it always works quite well to do that. So if I put a circle on the end of the spiral and then start spiraling out, a bit like thinking about the beads. So as we go around, we're going to graduate the size of those spirals, so, or those curl cues that we're adding onto the spiral. So they're kind of adding to that going round feel. And what happens when I hit here? Well, I'm going to kind of almost like imagine I'm rolling over the top like a big 4x4, kind of like crashing over those sort of small ones in there, and then they're just going to get smaller and fit into that space like that. So just by keeping your lines following that spiral shape, it kind of gives it a really nice rhythm. And then I can fit some teardrops in here. Now I would probably, if I was just doing this not in a class, I'd probably continue getting all this sort of line work in first, and then I would move on to looking at ways to add tone. But as we've got the class and you want to see some different techniques in this, I'm now going to have a look at how we can get some tone into some of these areas to really enhance that kind of 3D effect. But I think we can start to see that's the basic sort of overall shape of our doodle coming. I would put more doodle work in around here, particularly around underneath the jewel. I get some more fine line work in there so that it's got a nice backdrop to it, because obviously there's a bit of a space here, and sort of same around here. But I want to show you how to get some sort of like tonal kind of quality into the jewellery, and how to make it look a bit different, and how to get some tone and some shade into these soft sort of roundy shapes. So you can use all sorts of different media, just give you a different kind of effect. So I'm going to kind of show you different materials. I would probably find the one that I liked best and then do the whole piece in that. I don't tend to mix and match so much. But so let's start having a look at, I mean, you're completely free to do whatever you like, it's not a problem. So let's have a look at some of these sort of curly shapes here. So if I wanted to use some pencil, I'm using colour pencil here to put some tone in. You have to keep thinking to yourself, if these are round shapes, they're going to catch the light at some point and they're going to be in shadow at other points. So the general rule, if you're not sure where to put shadow and where to leave a highlight, imagine that your light source is basically coming down from above, because that's usually how we see our light sources. So the top of the shape we're going to keep quite pale, but you can then go in and shade some shadow lines along the edge of my sort of fat poopy shape there. And the same way as where we're using the pen lines, where they come closer together, you get more impact, you get more darkness. So once I've sort of got an idea where I want the shadow, I can then colour the bottom of that shape and that sort of bottom edge a much stronger purple, and that becomes a sort of highlight. And then I can leave a little bit of white at the top, make sure I've got that defined, and then come in and shade that a bit darker, and that becomes then a sort of it's got a lovely sort of fat feel, like a sort of pearly like sort of surface. I'll do another one next week because it's really quite effective when you see 2 and 3 together. So with this one, this area here would sort of generally be, you want to keep it highlighted, and then this becomes shadow under here. So I'm going to again come under and get that edge much darker looking, and leaving this sort of top edge white. And it's just pressing a bit harder where you want it darker. Think about doing a medium tone first, because then you can go a little bit lighter on one side of it, and you can go on top and make it a bit darker on the other side. With the little spaces you get in between, you could go and colour those in with the purple pencil. You can also go in with your black pen and just pick out those little, what we call negative spaces, the sort of little shapes that appear in between shapes. And if we colour those in, it kind of gives it a nice background feel. So we can do those in black pen, and that gives them like a shadow quality as well, because it's much darker, and that immediately starts making these lighter things pop forwards. So like where you get a little circle like this one, if you've coloured around it, it looks like now it's like a little pearl catching the light. So to again enhance that, if I just colour round the edge of it, but I leave a little circle in the middle, that's giving it a highlight, and it makes it look much more 3D. So if I come in even closer, if you can see that a bit more happening, you're starting to get a really nice kind of feel. And obviously you can choose any colours you like. If you do this in sort of, you could choose like a gold and a brown, and you could do gold on first and then use the brown to put shadow in, and then this starts to really look like gilded, like a piece of gold work. You could go for silvery colours, you could do all in shades of grey, and that will really give it a kind of very moon-like quality. Now you might be really enjoying the kind of black and white that we've got going on with this, and you might prefer to do it in line work. So I'm just going to colour this purple in here, and then I'm going to show you how to get a similar kind of feel with different pen work if you want to stick to being completely black and white. If you have decided in the course even that yes, you do want to have this done as a sort of lovely black and white tattoo, then I'll show you how to do it in black and white, so you can keep that kind of theme. So I'm just going to colour in again between those sort of 2 negative shapes like that there. So if we look at these 3 bumps here now, if we imagine, I'll tell you what, I'm going to look at this sort of section down here, because I'm going to keep this maybe in pencil, and then maybe where I've got, so if I imagine these ones are going to be all in purple pencil, but then these ones that are kind of coming in opposition to it, I'm going to do these in sort of pen work, so we can sort of have a bit of rhythm and a bit of reason or method even to our sort of madness. So I'm going to swap to quite a light gauge of pen. I'm going to use a 0.05, which is 0.5 millimetre. This is the most, as it were, the most easily available tiny pen. You can occasionally get others that are even smaller, but this is a good, for doing really tiny detail, this is a great size. So we're going to want to get some shadow. We're going to look at this area here. We want to get some shadow and some shading into it. So at a starting point, let's just quickly do some of the negative space in between these shapes, so that we've got this same sort of black background carrying through. Probably should have done this in the slightly bigger pen, having sung the praises for the tiny pen, because it obviously takes slightly longer to colour in the negative spaces. But if you want to think again, if you're not sure what to do with the lighting, think again that the lighting is coming from above, So anything it hits, like this round nose of this comma shape here, that bit there is going to be quite highlight, and it's going to be the underneath sort of the back of the shape that's going to be darker. Now you can do this in tiny dots if you really feel like being super dedicated. So you can just start putting in dots underneath, and where you put a dot, that gives you a tone. It breaks up the white surface, and you start off just doing a few dots like that, but then you can keep on adding more and more dots. And I think I may have mentioned previously, but the artist that's really famous for dot work, though he did it all in colour, is Pissarro, a French impressionist who painted those incredible dot paintings that, you know, the closer you get to them, the more you can see that they're individual dots. But when you stand back at a distance, they all merge and they become figures and colours and things, and it's quite incredible. If you just do a few dots like that, hopefully the camera is just about showing you that. If I come in a bit closer, it starts to give a little bit of shade and a bit of sort of definition on that shape. And because they're using a dot work, it also gives you a little bit of surface. So the surface has a slightly textured feel to it. It's not as smooth textured as the colour pencil effect, but it's a different sort of surface. You can imagine this might be something with a slightly pitted surface. And just where you want to get things darker, you just put more dots down. So where you've got this little sort of chin underneath the shape here, you would probably put a few dots in there as well, just to act as a tiny bit of shadow. So this is a really good way of getting both tone and texture onto a drawing. So although it starts off as a very sort of smooth doodle, it still then starts getting a bit of surface to it as well. And again, under here, I'm just going to get that underneath section of that curve darker and follow the back of that shape, this shape, along in dots to create this sort of shadowing effect. And I think when you pull back a bit, you can see how that just, it's quite subtle, but it just gives it that kind of feel of being 3D and stops it from being just a flat silhouette shape. And just to give a little bit more shade under that sort of edge there. And you can spend a long time doing this, and it gets very absorbing in a very satisfying kind of way. But of course, it's not the only way that you can get sort of a 3D quality into your drawings. You can do it with tiny line work. So as you come round to these sort of shapes here, you can just put little tiny curved lines in, and they don't have to be terribly detailed, but just little lines, again packing them closer together where you want there to be more shadow, and then just letting them naturally kind of peter out. They're so thin you can hardly see them, but you can see how that just adds like a little, what we would call cross-hatching kind of shadow. So again, looking at this one, the highlight's going to be up in the fat area here, and then we're just going to flick a few little lines, and if you make them curved lines, again it's going to help indicate that it's a curved surface that we're working towards, that we're showing. So it's just going to put a little bit of shadow into that sort of area here, and then again under here plenty of lines packed close together because it's going to be quite dark and shadow, and this one would be casting a shadow on the one below, so there's going to be some shadow under there and shadow coming up under there. So that's just adding to that sort of 3D feel of just getting those in, looking like, just gives them a bit more depth and a bit more sort of detail. You can see when you pull back, it really helps to kind of give this feeling that they're disappearing down into this surface here. And if you want to make the highlights look brighter, make this, and you can't go any whiter than the paper you've got, you make the area around the highlight darker. So if you want to get really sort of wet looking highlights, again I'm going to swap now to a brush pen, mainly because it's also slightly quicker to use than doing a straight fine liner pen. I'm saying I'm going to switch to a brush pen. My brush pen is hiding from me. Here he comes. Right, so again, if I wanted to make these really kind of like look very sort of shiny and metallic-y, I could do it almost all in black, so I could just put in, and similar to the gemstone, I can leave little white highlights going down in, and I would do them in size, and then I can fill in between them, and I would just leave a little slick of white highlight along that edge there and fill it in, and that starts to look like it's a much more like a piece of jet or something with a really dark surface. And I can just put another just to fill that in again, but just leaving, if I draw where I want the highlights in first, and maybe a sort of big fat oval highlight, and then come in and draw in around that shape. And that gives me, and I can sort of slightly carve away some of that highlight with a brush pen, and that makes them look like they're sort of much wetter and shinier. And you can still see some of the shape, but these ones are definitely sort of darker and made of a different material. And if you don't want to disappear, but you just leave a little bit of white, and that will kind of be like a little edge of light along that sort of surface there. So that's sort of like if you want to do something very kind of shiny and kind of dark and wet look sort of feel. So let's have a think about the stones, or the kind of gemstone effect. So with to get a kind of really nice cabochon kind of stone feel, I would use colour pencil for this over pen. I think you can do it with pen. It's extremely time consuming, but you can just about do it. So usually the stones have a sort of darkish centre, so I start off by just putting a sort of area of shadow into that middle, and then where we've got these highlight bubbles, I want to get a dark tone around those highlight bubbles, because they kind of have that thing about trying to make the highlights kind of pop. So by getting, even in colour pencil, if we go darker, if we go round them, it's going to make them a bit darker. And then keep thinking it's sort of like a round shape, so you can maybe put some bands of different sort of colour in and just get some different tones kind of happening. You don't want to colour it all in completely, you still want to leave a kind of somehow the dark line makes that a really obvious highlight, but we don't want to go we want to leave a little bit of kind of luminescence in some of the rest of the stone. So I'm going to put some of my dark pencil work into that, and then I've got a little sort of bubble of highlight of shadow in the middle, and then I'd probably use a grey, or I'm using a grey or a paler blue to kind of come in and blend in around those. So much softer, much more sort of blending to get that kind of feel of a stone. But hopefully those white highlights here stay really bright, and eventually you want to make sure that it's only those white highlights, or that are defined by the black lines, that are completely white. So everywhere else you put in some gentle kind of overlay of colour. And then if you want to get a bit darker, come back with your purples and reds. It's sort of like a yin and yang kind of feel, so you generally want to have one side that is doing the darker. Go dark around the edge as well, a bit like we did with the iris of the eye. If you go dark around the edge, because obviously it tends to be a bit more shadow around there, because it's set in metal, so you don't have you're up against the metal, so you don't have so much light radiating through it. So if you kind of eventually work your way all the way round, so that is sort of doing an edge to it like that, that sort of start to really look like a kind of gemstone. It gives it a nice sort of, again, quite a liquid kind of feel alongside those really hard, strong highlights. And with the little stones around the edge, you can just very easily colour a border with a little white spot in the middle, and you can see how straight away that's starting to make them pop up and give them a bit more life and a bit more depth. So they've all ended up being the same colour, but I am working quite quickly because we've only got about 5 minutes or 6-7 minutes to go realistically. So I'm just going to pop some of those in so you can see how, and the same effect goes in for all the bead work you've done. You can then make these beads look much more three-dimensional just by a bit of shadow underneath, a circle of, think where they're joining each other, they'd cast a shadow on each other, so you put a little like collar of shadow round the bead and then a bit more underneath, and leave a white highlight and that starts to make that look more three-dimensional. And you can still do the same thing again with dot work and with pen work, just to come in. So we're going to put a little bit of shadow underneath each one. Imagine it sort of on the bottom half, almost like a little smile line, leaving the top half sort of much lighter, and that starts to give that the feeling of little sort of beads. When you're doing a faceted stone, so when you get round to the sort of big piece in the middle, you'll probably find that if you look at a faceted stone, some of the facets are going to stay completely white, and to get the sort of sparkle effect, if you kind of give each one a colour, so be slightly more flatter with your colour application, so you can almost just completely tone in these sort of layers in purple like that, but then you leave maybe this one completely white and take a very pale purple tone into that one, and then maybe up here a darker facet again, and probably leave that one white, and just vary the tone again across the piece so it starts to have different tonal values, and that should hopefully give you the feeling of something being a bit sparkly, because again the white highlight really sort of pops out against that. And you can even, once you've got colour in place, you can go back with your pen line and you can add just a little flick of pen work along that to sort of darken it. By using the sort of diagonal lines, that'll give you both a bit of tone but also kind of gives the feeling of shade, and because using lines it sort of makes it feel a bit sort of more sparkly somehow, so it gives it a bit more faceted kind of feel. And then as we come down onto the drop, to get a teardrop shape to look really nice and rounded, if you kind of do sort of like half moons of colour at the bottom, just leaving a little bit of light, and then just take it a little bit up the sides, but make sure you've got that definite half moon shape in your highlight, and then that just kind of gives it that feel that it's a drop that's sort of sitting round. And like where you've got these ones on the down sort of string, if you've got this big one here, the bottom half of that big one is going to be in shadow because the light's coming down that way, but then the top of this bead is going to almost be in shadow because it's like wearing a little hat, so it's being shaded by the one above. So you're just going to see a little tiny bit of highlight on that, and just keep on going down to get those sort of colours in. And obviously you can use loads of different mixed colours. You can go for you can bring in a couple of other colours into your facets because they will be reflecting off something else, so we can start to get all those sort of colours going. Right, okay, so here we have somewhere to start with, and hopefully a beautiful bejewelled moon for you to go away and finish filling up. Areas like this where we've got these nice lines here, start putting some shadow in underneath that line. And what I haven't managed to do is give the overall highlight effect, but I realise that's something that we're going to have to do in another tutorial. But if I just put some shadow along into those bits and leave a soft white line under them, you see immediately it starts to really make them pop out. And this would be a really lovely one to keep working with your colours and get them all, so that at the end of the day what you have is this stunning, hopefully stunning, magical piece of moon jewellery. And there we go. There's magical moon jewellery.